Factorio is a game that does not require you to be too precise. Sure, there are optimal ratios and every item only needs a specific amount of stuff, but in 99.9% of scenarios you can just put the thing on the belt and send it to where you want it. And if you want more things, just make more. But what if that was not the case? What if every production line had to take in an exact amount of resources, shove those through a set of assembling steps in exact amounts, and then only start to make another product when it's done with its set? Well, I decided to figure that out. But of course, I can't. At least, not really in an automated way in the beginning, so let's get up to where I can actually get going. While I can't make assemblers in the start, handcrafting is more precise right now anyway, so not only is it easy, but it's in line with the oh-so-revered spirit of the challenge or something like that. That said, 10 red science later, I do have access to assembling machines. And while I can't make assembling lines, as those would be imprecise, I can set up these little hand-fed builds, since they allow me to put in a set amount of input to make a set amount of output. So I would say they're valid. This allows me to set up the little red science setup, while feeding it from a bunch of burner miners and furnaces I have on the ore patches. Are those precise? Well, honestly, no, not really. Because burner objects can't be really precision due to burn time in Factorio not being tied to an amount of items smelted, and instead just being an amount of time that isn't necessarily related as far as I can tell. But I promise the second items come out of a furnace, the next time they are used it will be in an exact setup. But I can't actually make one yet. Before I can actually get precise, I need combinators, which is what this early science rush is for. I'm pretty much grabbing as little as possible and just moving to green science so I can unlock these math boxes. I'll explain those when we get there, but right now, science sprint. The little red science setup is slow, but it gets us most of the way pretty fast, and while that works, I begin handcrafting the green science I need, which for circuit network, I just need 100, so not too much. And just about an hour in, I have the circuit network unlocked. Though, due to the beloved science pack rounding, it isn't as exact as I wanted it to be. But with that unlocked, I can get started on my first precision builds. For that, I need a set of arithmetic, decider, and constant combinators along with the assembling machines. Setting down 2 assemblers to make gears, I set down an arithmetic, a decider, another arithmetic, and a decider beside each. And in a move that may be a little odd for some Factorio players, instead of a belt to move the iron into the system, I'm just using inserters chaining from one iron chest to the next. The last inserter from the gear segment leads into the next area, this one being for belts. This time, 2 arithmetic combinators, a decider combinator, and another 2 arithmetic combinators, and then a constant again. But this design isn't quite right, so let's swap it around a bit. I don't know what I was originally planning with that last setup, because I'm pretty sure it would not work. So instead of arithmetic, decider, arithmetic, constant for the gears, I need arithmetic, decider, 2 arithmetic, and 2 constants, and I will explain why in just a moment. For now, I will just say one of the sets of arithmetic and constant combinator controls the input to the assembler, and the other controls the output from the area. With this, then into the belt area, which is quite similar, but instead of being arithmetic, decider, 2 arithmetic, 2 constant, since it has 2 inputs, it's 2 arithmetic, 1 decider, 4 arithmetic, 2 constant. And yes, this does look weird, and if you haven't been looking at this kind of design for like 50 hours, I'm sure it might also look complicated, but I promise it really isn't that bad. But with the inputs and outputs set for each assembler, I can toss in 6 iron, and out comes 4 belts. Also, I add 2 more constant combinators, 1 for each segment. So it's 1 arithmetic, 1 decider, 2 arithmetic, and 3 constant for the 1 item recipes, and 2 arithmetic, 1 decider, 4 arithmetic, and 3 constant for 2 item recipes. But you are also probably getting sick of me saying that like it actually means anything at all. So right here, right now, I'm going to explain how this system works, as it's more or less how every assembly line will work in this whole playthrough. Now, I have all these cells with 2 assemblers on each side, but that is just to keep things more compact, so we can just look at one side, in this case the north side, as it's the one with the special constant combinator. In theory, this design can be split into 6 main parts. First, the transport line. This is the chests and inserters going down the middle. The only logic in this is that the final output inserter that takes info from the output control cell, as well as the so-called special constant, or as I will call it, the pass-through combinator. Second, we have the assembler. It is the building. No explanation needed, as there isn't any wires or logic actually tied to it, even though technically I might have been able to. But now the actual combinator segments. Third segment and first combinator segment is the ambiguity cell. These are the first arithmetic combinators. There's one arithmetic combinator per input item, and all these do is convert the actual item signal that it receives as a pulse from the inserter leading into the assembler, and converts it into an ambiguous signal like a letter, or as I end up using later, a number signal. The ambiguity cell feeds directly into the segment 4, the memory cell. Anyone with much experience in Factorio combinators knows what that means, but if you don't, it's pretty much what it sounds like. The ambiguity cell just sends a short pulse with the signal, and the memory cell catches this and stores it, keeping it as a constant signal to feed into the next 2 segments. The next 2 segments being the input control cell and the output control cell. Both of these use an arithmetic for each item and exactly one constant combinator. However, that special pass-through combinator I mentioned before also deals with the output control cell, so technically it has one more. These 2 cells are almost exactly the same thing. The input control cell has a constant combinator set to output the amount of each item the assembler needs to take in as a positive signal. The arithmetic combinator reads the amount of items the input inserter has already picked up via the memory cell, and outputs it as a negative. These 2 signals are added together so that when the inserter has picked up as much of an item as it needs to, the signal becomes 0, and the filter for that item is removed from the input inserter, stopping it from grabbing more than it should. The output control is effectively the exact opposite. Its constant combinator contains the amount of each item the assembler needs as a negative signal, and its arithmetic combinator or combinators take in and pass out the amount already picked up and sends them out as positive signals, once again reading those from the memory cell. Those 2 signals are combined and sent into the output inserter, telling it when it can start taking things to the next area, so it does not take items away before the segment is done with them. However, since the constant in arithmetic would only get to being zeroed out, this is where the pass-through combinator comes in. See, the signal being zeroed out is good for the input inserter since a signal of 0 does nothing, and therefore the filter is reduced. But with the output inserter, this is not quite enough, since while the filters will not be set due to the negative signals, as only positive signals actually set filters, once again a signal of 0 does nothing, and therefore the output inserter would never get its filters, and never pass items down to the next area. Therefore, I add one constant combinator that has a signal of 1 for each item that should be able to pass through the system, so the filters are set, and it can pass items it no longer needs along. Some may ask why I didn't just reduce the number in the negative constant by 1, since that would actually do the same thing, but it's just for ease overall. See, this way when I make the blueprint, instead of having to set all the negative constants to be the same as the positives, but -1 and negative in that order, I just have to do the pass-through combinator, and make the negative constant have the negative signals of the positive. And additionally, it allows me to add extra signals in case there's an item needed further ahead, but not in the current cell, so it can be instantly pushed ahead instead of getting stuck in the cell that doesn't need it. And so, chain a set of these together, put the recipe and number of input items in each of the 4 combinators per pair, and also add all the pass-through signals. Easy, right? Well, yeah, but it would take a long time. But fortunately, due to the power of parameterized blueprints in 2.0, it is actually pretty easy. With a parameterized version of this blueprint, all I actually need to do is A, do all the math to figure out how much of each item I need for the desired final product, B, decide how many items a single assembler should make per cycle, C, figure out how many of each input I need to make the right amount of each output, and D, place the blueprint, and finally, E, plug in the recipe and the input amounts without misremembering any of the numbers from the previous steps, because if I do, it won't work. So, simple. Oh, and also, I need to make sure this red wire is attached to the input of every memory cell on the line, and no other red wires are, so that the reset signal can be sent through. What's a reset signal, you ask? Well, long story short, in order for a memory cell to work and actually, keep its memory, you need to set a condition that is always true. However, this comes with the benefit of if you don't need or want that memory anymore, you can just make it true. No, you can make it false, and suddenly the memory cell gains memory loss and forgets everything that has ever happened. Just like me while trying to read this line for some reason. This way, after the line has gone front to back and made everything it's supposed to, the outputs are read by this memory cell, who outputs to this decider combinator, and when the desired output is reached, the decider sends the reset signal, in this case the red signal with a value of 1, and the whole cycle can restart, since all the memory cells only work if the value of the red signal is 0. Also, technically there are more segments, for example this single item input for the belt line. It is quite simple, but it is effectively a set of combinators that only allow the amount of items needed to complete the end item request into the system with its own memory cell, which is also reset with the reset signal at the end of a cycle, allowing a new set of materials in when it's reset, and all the assemblers to craft their items, and for the output to be made.
What the fuck are you talking about? Why is this script written like fuck?
To put that in simple terms that are not overcomplicated for no reason, basically, this part of the thing puts the amount of things that we want into the system. That's all it does, okay? That's what I was trying to say. But I overcomplicated it for some reason, because my brain, full of worms. That being said, part of the reason that my brain is probably like that is because I've been making things like this. Look at this. Is this a way overcomplicated way to make 6 belts? And honestly, probably not that great all of the time? Absolutely. However, do I get a rush of joy every time I see this line of circuit conditions reset as it makes the items I want so it can do it all over again? Also absolutely. I don't know why, but seeing it do that, that's great. However, as some of you may have noticed, belts are quite simple, and I even kinda mentioned in the super complicated way of talking about the input thing that this is specifically only designed to handle one input, and that was for a reason. See, eventually I want these sections to be provided plates from belts, but since it works on chests and chests cannot be filtered in vanilla, well eventually it would probably get clogged up on one item and not be able to get the other anymore. This is a problem because even in the early game, most items require at least 2 inputs, copper and iron in the early game specifically, so I need a 2-item input, which takes more combinators, but this is also fed by a box, so how do I solve that one getting clogged? Because theoretically it would still get clogged, right? Well, we will get to that in a moment, but right now we have no belts, so it does not really matter, so in other words, we'll come back to that. First, I'm going to make some fast inserters, as I'm going to need those in mass to actually set up all the sciences with contraptions such as these. I set down a constant combinator to do all the math in, and just basically put all of the ingredients in a hierarchy tree to see how much of the raw stuff we need and how much of their other products we will need to make with them. And with that, we can just slap it all together. Well, almost. I do actually need to make another blueprint for a 3-input segment, but that's basically just adding more ambiguator combinators and another negative and positive combinator respectively. So, not actually that scary. Scariest part is just the material cost for all these combinators, as these few burner drills and handcrafting are starting to prove quite slow. But a few dozen more combinators handcrafted and some time looking through combinators to make sure I didn't do them wrong, and here we are, the blue inserter line. This bad boy makes 4 fast inserters per cycle, and after a bit of bug fixing, just look at all of those filters reset as it finishes crafting all of them. That is some wire spaghetti art right there. Also, as of doing the voiceover for this, I realized that it would have been absolutely awesome if I would actually have set up like a programmable speaker at the end, so every time it finished a line of doing something, it would make like a ding noise or something. That would have been awesome, and now I'm disappointed in myself for not doing that, because that would have been great. But I guess it is what it is, so I'll do that if I do this again. But after that, perhaps a controversial setup. A furnace stack. To be blunt, this is not special, not precise, just there. See, with a width of 2 and also the before issue with a burner setup not being truly precisable as far as I'm aware, I just kinda decided not to bother yet, because Blue Science unlocks electric furnaces which I originally intended to use to replace them. But since this is not special, I'm just gonna run through it. Yellow belt, 48 stone furnaces, inserters, belt out lines. Yes, just 1 belt of copper and 1 belt of iron is all. I should not need more in this early era of this playthrough. But with this, remember how I mentioned the potential of clogging with 2 input items? Well, here is how I fix that. I put down 2 decider combinators that read the amount of copper and iron in the feed box, and if there's more of one than the other, it filters the input inserter to the one that there's less of. Though, if there's an equal amount of both, it is just filtered to be able to grab either. That way, there will always be more or less of an even amount of each in the box, so the one going into the actual line always has access to both. After that, I can use all the blueprints to set up a precision mall, mostly for the combinators. So you know, basic math, apply basic math, debugging, watch the perfect cycle occur, gain serotonin, and now I have constant combinators automated. Then, all those steps again for arithmetic and decider combinators, but that is easier since deciders and arithmetics are literally the exact same recipe, just a different product. So the decider combinators are actually just a carbon copy of the arithmetic combinators. This takes a lot of copper, so I need more copper mines, but otherwise this went up without too much effort. Now, for this playthrough, I am on a real-world preset, so I don't need to worry about the biters expanding. But as I expand, I do still need to show up and blast them apart so they don't mess with my perfection. But frankly, right now that's easy work. Then I just need to work on some more mall builds, specifically the iron chest since I'm going to need a lot of those, and then I'll also set up one for assemblers, as that should be the last thing I need for this mall. But for the mall, it is just more the same, so here we are, the mall stuff. And so of course, like 16 minutes into this video, we can actually start working on our first actual science build. You may think that this would be the same too, but actually it's a little different. See, with all the mall builds, I have had one pair of assemblies for each, thing. But since I want science to be produced faster, I'm gonna want more assemblers. Due to this, I decided to have each gear assembler only make 2 gears each for a total of 60 gears for the 60 science per cycle I want to do. So that means 30 gear assemblers, which is 15 segments, and then right after, red science assemblers, each making 2 science packs each, and therefore 30 science assemblers as well. This may at first seem like a strange form of size indulgence, but it's actually to make it so that the multiple assemblers can be working at the same time, which should overall speed this up by a decent margin. And trust me when I say, any speed aid is good for this kind of design. Also, the 2 crafts thing is in fact pretty important. See, an inserter will add up to 2 crafts of an item, but won't add more than that. Therefore, if you try and craft 3 or more, and not every material is immediately available, and since we're, transporting through inserters, most likely it won't be, this will kinda get your materials stuck, and will slow down the system, as the items cannot pass forward until it has grabbed all the items it wants. So, 2 items per assembler is the best in most scenarios. That said, to be frank, more than 2 gear assemblers was for sure overkill, as gears craft so fast that the next set does not even start crafting before the first ones are done. So just 1 set making all the gears would have been cheaper and actually faster. But anyway, 120 iron plates and 60 copper plates in, the 120 iron becomes 60 gears. Combine the gears and copper plates for 60 red science out. Perfection. And it only takes 2 minutes and just under 14 seconds to run through the cycle for 60 red science. So very efficient, for sure. That said, this will get faster once I get the hand size upgrade for my inserters, as having my inserters be able to grab more than 1 item per grab will make the transport line go much faster. But it works, and now I can just queue up the other red sciences, slap down some labs down at the end of the science stack, and boom. Automatic research, and we're only, almost 19 minutes into this video. On that note, let's move straight into green science. For 60 green science, we need 60 belts and 60 inserters. The 60 belts are made with 30 plates and 30 gears, as each craft of belts makes 2 belts, and the 30 gears are made with 60 iron plates. The 60 inserters are made with 60 iron plates, 60 iron gears, and 60 green circuits. The 60 gears are made with 120 iron plates, and the 60 circuits are made with 60 iron plates and 180 copper wire. The 180 copper wire, of course, made with 90 copper plates. So overall, 60 green science requires 330 iron plates and 90 copper plates. I do set up a green science concept, but it vanished between clips, so instead let's look at this upgrade to the arithmetic combinator build, since I need more of them than any of the others. But anyway, green science. Actually, I need to do that. I start with the iron gears, making 3 per assembler for some reason, as this is probably the build where I realize that 2 is probably the maximum I should be doing, unless it's like a mall build, or it crafts really fast. But anyway, right after these gears, I make the yellow belts. Also 3 crafts per assemblers, I guess. The engineer clearly doesn't see why not, but instead of making the rest of the science, I end the line at belts. I place a ghost of green science as a spacer and then begin working on a line for the inserter specifically. So gears, then alternating wire and circuit assemblers who are making 6 each. This is for sure when I learned the lesson about only 2 per assembler, because as you can see, stuff gets stuck instead of just going down the whole line cleanly until both inputs are there, and it kinda sucks, homie. Or, as past me said, I was greedy and over-compressed the accordion. But it should still work, even if it's slow as hell. But it also is done incorrectly, because I did the math wrong, because there are way too many inserter assemblers. And while I was originally planning on saying something like, I'll let this work for now to get the starter science and rebuild it later, this thing is an insult to precision, and especially so since I straight up have too many assemblers, and therefore, I kill. But anyway, with that now gone, I can rebuild it. Better, faster, less stupid. I still make the gears in batches of 3, but as I said before, with how fast gears craft, I would actually be better off just making them all in one set, so this is actually quicker for them. It's kinda the same story with wire, but frankly, the actual reason I'm making those in sets of 3 is so that I can immediately have them sent to the circuit assemblers right ahead of them, which each make 2, and you need 3 crafts of wire to make 2 crafts of circuits, so it makes sense, and then I just loop that pattern over and over again. And with those I can reset up the inserters, making 2 per assembler as God intended. Then, between those 2 lines, I can finally set up the actual green science assemblers, fed with the same 2 input balancer and input circuit as everything else so far, but instead of balancing and inputting the copper and iron plates, it is inserting and balancing the belts and inserters. And so with this, I now have green science made, which, yeah, was a little more complex than the red science. But put that science on a belt, send it to the labs with the red science, and I can now start researching the green science tree. But what should I be aiming for? Well, I'm instantly aiming for oil processing. Not for the oil or any of its products, but just for a research that requires it as a prerequisite. So, some time and evictions later, I start running a power line out into the middle of nowhere while handcrafting a pump jack to get that oil trigger tech. And with that, I research plastic, then advanced circuits, then logistics 2, then bulk inserters, then inserter capacity bonus 1, just to get the actual research I was going for, inserter capacity bonus 2. I want that because as I briefly mentioned before, this makes my fast inserters capable of grabbing 2 items instead of 1. And while I'm setting all the inserters that lead directly into an assembler to only be able to grab 1 item at a time to make sure they don't grab too much, this will allow the inserters in the middle transport line to move items down the line twice as fast, which should increase the speed of those builds by quite a bit. Once I get the inserter 2 research, you can even see the production graph spike a bit, and the gear assemblers almost being able to get to the next segment before finishing theirs. But with that set up and working in the background, it is time for me to make some changes to the design. Yep, I found a way to make it substantially better. See, I realized that instead of having it be 1 arithmetic for each input into the memory, into 2 arithmetic for each input and 2 constants, I can instead have it just be 1 arithmetic into a memory cell into 2 arithmetic into 2 constants, as well as the pass-through constant, of course. How did this occur? Well, simple. I stopped making the signals different. Yeah, if you just keep the signals as what they are instead of trying to be fancy, it allows you to use the each function in the arithmetic combinator, which allows it to deal with all of that input math at once. That being said, the first arithmetic combinator that takes from the input inserter doesn't actually do any math. It just acts as an in-between step so that the memory cell is not directly touching the inserters. This is important because that would make the inserters set their filters based on what's on the memory cell, and we don't want that. Also, just now, while writing the script, I'm realizing I probably did not need the arithmetic combinator for the output inserter control, as it also just spits out what it takes from the memory cell, so connecting that inserter to the memory cell and doing it this way, theoretically, should not be different. Also, while doing this design, I made sure that this middle space was open, and you'll see why pretty soon. The main advantage of this design is fairly obvious. Much less arithmetic combinators, since every recipe, regardless of the amount of inputs, can be done in this blueprint. Well, technically this design gets weird if you try and have more than 5 items being able to go through the middle, but that is an issue we can get to later, and is also not a new issue either, and would also have occurred on the previous model. Also, yes, I can do the exact same thing for the initial input inserter, so that's nice too. Oh, and this blueprint, this one that just adds some boxes and the memory cells on it. This one is so helpful, it is hard to put into words. Since now I do not need to manually set all the wires to connect between the segments, and can instead just run this blueprint over the whole line. Which is really nice because there has been many instances where a thing breaks and I have to debug because I missed one single red wire connection and so part of it didn't reset. After that, and to show off the benefits of this new design, I'm going to set up a line for electric mining drills. For the most part, this is the same old. Just do the math and set the recipes and the item inputs, but this is also a great time to show off why that gap next to the assembler is so valuable. See, instead of shoving all the copper wire back into the main line, I can instead set the inserter in the gap to push it immediately into the circuit assembler. And since wire isn't very dense, this is actually a pretty good idea, as it leaves the inserters in the box chain free to move literally anything else. Don't mind me forgetting to actually remove the inserters going into the box chain. I fixed that during the debugging step when, due to that oopsie, the line fails to make the circuits. Also, don't mind that the copper wire in that box is still there. It's fine. Since nothing actually reads from that box, I can theoretically leave that there forever and it would be fine. But with that made, everything else is normal, so 2 mini gear assemblers and onto the 2 minor assemblers and then the output. And with that set, we let it run. And it works. It just works. Very nice. After that, and blasting some nearby nests and worms, however, time for a new smelting stack, which unfortunately at this point in the playthrough means another non-precise build. Kinda nasty. But I need steel, and I'm under the impression this is the way it must be done, so here it is. Iron stack feeds a steel stack next door, and then also a stone brick stack since I need that too. I add those to the bus and we move on from those terribly unprecise abominations. Last thing I need to add to the bus for now is coal. So I add a coal line, and if you could not tell by those 3 new items on the bus, that means it's time for science pack number 3. Military science. I did the math off camera this time, but for 60 packs of military science I need 600 stone bricks, 600 lumps of coal, 540 iron plates, and 30 steel plates. However, this actually brings up an issue that you may not have immediately thought of, and that is that I've never had to have more than 2 inputs and therefore have to figure out how to get more items into a balanced box, which, well, leads to me making this thing. It is pretty horrid looking, but should technically work, so it's fine, except it doesn't work because I added an extra box, and that gets kinda weird, so I have to make something else. So instead I use this, which is almost the same thing, but like not quite, and should work enough. But to get started, I make yellow ammo assembler, and similar to how we did circuits before, that feeds directly into a red ammo assembler right next to it. The red ammo line ends up, well, longer than anticipated, to be frank, and once it's done, I immediately realize why I did not have to make a 5-input balancer inserter, because I can split production over multiple lines like I did with green science. So, of course, I take down this red ammo build and the terrible inserter balancer abomination thing. And this time, I start with the walls, and after making this line, I also instantly realize that this line is too long and too slow. Walls craft, like, super duper hella fast, and this is the point that I realize that due to the craft speed, it does not matter how many assemblers I make, it will be slow due to inserter speed, so having less will make it faster. So I cut it down and make it into just a 2-assembler setup that makes the walls for 60 military science. Next up, and something that does not have that issue, we have grenades. I make 2 per assembler like a smart person would to keep it as fast as possible, and then just make the chain have a total of 30 assemblers to make the 60 grenades I need. That is actually the best example of why doing only 2 crafts is so good. As you can see, each assembler grabs the plates it needs and passes them to the next, and then, when the coal goes and gets in the system, it can do the same thing with them, allowing for a bunch of the assemblers to be working at the same time. Not all of them, sure, but a lot more than would be otherwise possible if I tried to compress this at all. And then, last and most complex for military, we are going back to the red ammo. That said, it is military, so it's not too hard. The hard part is just that this item does in fact need 3 inputs to itself. But I realize I can just add steel with this long-handed inserter set to filters the same way the fast inserter is. While the long-handed inserter is slow, the bottleneck of this base will always be how fast it can make it through a cycle, not this initial box, so it really doesn't matter. And so again, just like last time, yellow ammo feeding straight into a red ammo assembler down a long line, and at the end we got the red ammo. Now, while this setup is a multi-lane just like green, I do something quite differently here. See, in green, I have the belt and yellow inserters as their own lines, resetting when they are done, not when the green science is, which means they just kinda keep making more, even if the green science can't accept it yet. This, while technically allowed since it's a precise build making this stuff, feels kinda strange. But anyway, I set up the black science line, which I definitely did the math right for, and definitely for sure did not forget that military science crafts 2 bottles per craft and not 1, and therefore I am making 120 per cycle instead of 60. I would for sure never make a mistake like that, and it was for sure on purpose. The reason I brought up the green science though, before I was distracted, it is that instead of having an output set that resets the line at the end of each line, wow, I said that well, I instead only have this one at the end of the military science assembler line. Then, with all the memory cells on the wall, grenade, red ammo, and military science connected to each other, when the reset signal is sent, instead of just restarting the line behind it, it resets it and all of the lines that feed directly into it, making for a much more precise build, I'd say. Then, of course, just run a belt from there to the labs, and that's science pack number 3 done. And we're only like 15 hours into the playthrough, and like 31 minutes into the video. But with military science unlocked, I set up a quick handcrafting setup for engines, and use those to make my first train for the run. I make a bunch of pump jacks and set up walls and flamethrowers for the little oil outpost. These won't have too much action, but enough that I think they're needed. But I can just load the oil onto a train and set it back to the furnace stacks. And with this, you're probably thinking, Lucy, how are you gonna set up precision fluid handling? And that's the neat part. I won't. At least, not here. I have decided that fluid-to-fluid recipes do not need to be done precisely because as far as I can tell, there's no way to actually do it. Unlike with inserters and solid items, there's not really a good way to do only a certain amount of fluid. Sure, there are pumps, but from even cursory testing, they're not able to fill up anything in front of them with an exact amount of any fluid. And the amount that it actually ends up going to seems really unpredictable. So I have decided that the fluid-to-fluid recipes will not need to be done precisely. And honestly, originally I was going to say that there was no way to do any fluid stuff precisely due to this, but I had an idea with barrels, and you get to see that now. So, after putting the crude oil through the refineries, it goes into these barreling assemblers. These petroleum barrels will then go onto belts like all the other resources. I also did the same barreling stuff for water as well. And then came the plotting. I almost gave up on making this barrel fluid stuff work as I worked on this sulfur build, as I quickly realized that fluid that enters one machine will not be available to the other, leading to instances like this, where both have enough for half a craft of sulfur but can't share it, and therefore it stops working. This, however, can be solved by only allowing one building for the pipeline, and while very slow, this would have worked, but I didn't like it. However, unable to sleep thinking on that, I got up in the middle of the night with a terrible idea, bad enough that it just might work. Instead of having no circuit logic for these fluid-only input builds, I can have a memory cell see how many items the system has made by reading the output inserter. That can then tie into this decider combinator that is set up so that if a chemical plant still needs to make more of whatever it's making, the decider combinator sends a signal to the chemical plant to set its recipe. This makes it so that when the chemical plant has made enough of what it needs to make, the recipe is taken out of it, and therefore the fluids that were in it are pushed back out into the pipes and become available to the other. This does require one to always make less than the other so that it can finish first and leave the rest of the input to the other one, and still more or less limits me to only 2 chem plants for fluid-based stuff, but it works, which means it is precise, which means I need to use it or something. Yeah. So this is how I'm going to be doing this fluid stuff, at least for now. I will change this later, and I think this is decent enough for now. But with that, I just have to send back the barrels to the barrelers, and this precision sulfur is done. With the sulfur done, you can probably guess what I'm building up. Chemical science. So of course, next up I'm going to be doing the engine units. I do shrink the amount of gear and pipe assemblers that I was considering using, however I should really have just committing to using one set for each, but after those, just the engine blocks. Pretty simple, as it's just those plus some steel. But of course, you know 'em, you love 'em, the last ingredient of chemical science, advanced circuits. These are kinda nasty because A, they're expensive, but also because B, they take plastic, which takes petroleum and coal, which means a new blueprint that can handle both the fluid and item side of things. However, that was not quite as bad as I expected, as when the chemical plant loses its recipe, it also allows the output inserter to take the coal out, so it's actually pretty much the same. With the plastic made, I make the red circuits on their own line, and it's already going to be long enough, and also weird. See, I need so many green circuits that I end up stacking and bending this line back and forth over itself since I did not want to make the line like 30 miles long. And again, this part is just the green circuits, and it needs 180 assembling machines. To be fair, it's also making the wire, but you know. I connect them together with more inserter chains and a couple of belts, but that's the green circuits for the red circuits. Then of course, the plastic from the plastic area, the green circuit from the green circuit area, and some more copper go into the actual red circuit chain. This chain is pretty similar to how the green circuits are set up, wire assemblers fed directly into the red circuit assemblers, and those take the green circuits and plastics from the inserter chain, and make the final red circuits. It is a bit of a horrible brick thingy, but it does work, and that's what matters. With that, now just to take those red circuits as well as the engines and sulfur from before and shove them into the last line of assemblers to make my 60 blue science. And of course, just like military science, these are set to reset at the same time when the blue science is finished, instead of at the end of their own respective lines. And while this was a nightmare and a headache to set up, seeing the whole thing refresh all at once when the science finally finished really just never gets old to me. Well, of course, after a bit of bug fixing, but that's to be expected at this point. And with that, it does it. It works. And that is Science Pack 4 finished at about 20 hours into the playthrough. Then I just run about to the labs and we can start doing some research with it. I do actually have to set up more mining drills and power at this point, as I'm running pretty low, but frankly, for a blue science level build, this is still not very much. Probably because it's a terribly slow base, but that's okay. With some blue sciences done and some more biters killed though, I make what may be an overall mistake, but that's probably fine. I tear the whole base down. Yep, all of it. Was this smart? No, it wasn't. But it allows me to rebuild some of these sciences that I did not make well, so I guess that's nice. Especially since green science is still slow as hell since I made it like an idiot. With that all torn down though and put into boxes, I come to the realization of my self-deceit, leading me to also tear down those terrible furnace stacks and all the barreling oil garbage. And now, I can reset up red science. See, while I cannot precision the coal really, I can, and therefore should have been the whole time, precisioning everything else. So setting up the chest line and some furnaces, I can put the combinators over here, telling the furnaces how much ore they're allowed to take from the belt. And since the coal is not really able to be precisioned, I just let that insert freely. Then of course, the plates go into the boxes, and it can function as normal from there. Instead of the input balancer of plates, just shove in the amount of ore the cycle needs, and that is what's put into the boxes. After that, I make the science, making it with alternating gears and red science assemblers, kinda like I did with the circuits before. This makes it decently fast, but longer than if I had just used 2 gear assemblers, but it is what it is, so it's fine I suppose. And so there's a line for 60 red a cycle. Again. After that, a long as hell line for green science. Long as it is because I'm making gears next to where they're used again, as well as the circuits, but also because I made the entire process in one line instead of splitting it up this time. And this will not become a theme. But yeah, 60 green a cycle, now also achieved again. Then of course after that, to military science. This I do split again though, as I did not feel like making this a one-liner due to the sheer amount of throughput required. So we have a wall stack, a grenade stack pulling the amount of coal needed from the fuel line into the system, and then of course a red ammo stack, which is more complicated again but for a different reason. See, this time I just need to figure out how to actually make steel in this line, and I end up doing it like this, with the iron smelting furnace feeding directly into the steel smelting furnace so I can keep it precise. The only odd thing is that this is not an even height, so in this instance there ends up needing to be a flipped variant, But with that, I can just send up all the plates upward into a normal chain of assemblers, with once again the yellow ammo being fed directly into the red ammo assemblers. And with those three done, the belt, the walls, the bullets, all over to the grenade stack to be fed into the black science build. I said that kinda weird, but you can see, I hope, that that's what it's doing. This time, I also properly set it up just like before, with the ammo, wall, and grenade lines only being reset once the military packs are done, so it's properly precise. With that, as you can guess, I move on to blue science. However, I do make a change to how I'm doing this stuff. Specifically, I'm treating the fluids that are made from nothing but fluid-to-fluid recipes like I am coal. In other words, I'm allowing myself to just bring them in directly, as while barrels can work, they only work if you need fluids in a multiple of 50. And refactoring all the math just to get that to work seems kinda stupid, so I decided I didn't want to, especially since later on that wouldn't work very well unless I was making big amounts of stuff. But anyway, all the assemblers / chem plants using them are still precision based, so even if they're flowing freely, they're only being used precisely. Kinda like the belts and inserters from the old green science build, so I'm calling it good. So bringing over the water and petroleum, I can set up the sulfur first and with relative ease. After that, we do the engines again, fairly easy as the only input is iron ore, and this is where I end up swapping to having the steel furnaces just have a gap between them instead of flipping every other set. But gears and pipes feed directly into the engine assemblers and steel taken from the line, and boom, engines. And then of course, last and most annoying yet again, the red circuits. These need an iron, copper, coal, and petroleum inputs, but I've done all that before in different spots, so I just need to fit it together here as one thing. And other than being a very large line with the circuits and wires both being direct inserted for this design, it really isn't all that bad. So just belt the circuits and engines down to the blue sulfur that leads into the blue science assemblers, and there we are. Back caught up with the worst base. But real quick, just to show this off a bit, I decide to download a mod real fast. This mod allows you to follow items on belts, allowing you to see how items go from one thing to another. With this, I can focus on this copper ore and see how it travels up the belt through the furnaces, and warning, real quick, for how shaky this gets with the chained inserters. If you get motion sick easy, might want to look away for a moment. But it goes up the line, going into the copper wire and into this green circuit assembler, then into the red circuit assembler, then back out into the middle line and out onto the belt. And then, after going down the belt, it goes into the blue science setup, and then finally into the box with the rest of the blue science. Very good. Then, just set down belt and lead up all those science packs to the tip of the green science spire where I've put the labs back down, and here we are, able to research again. And of course, the first thing I research is the next science pack to make. Purple science. This is going to be interesting. The first ingredient of the purple science we're going to make is going to be the rails, where we are instantly going to realize the main problem that these last two science packs are going to be posing, and that is just the sheer throughput requirements. For my 60 purple science packs, we need 600 rails. That means I need 300 stone and 1,650 iron ore, just for the rails. But there's also nothing to do but to do it, so I set up my furnaces, have all the iron plates turned into iron sticks in these two iron stick assemblers, and direct feed into the two rail assemblers. Yeah, I finally did the two assembler setup because these craft fast enough and the other two materials slow enough that there is not any way imaginable that this is not going to be enough. And so after that, we're moving on to something substantially more difficult. For our 60 purple science, we also need 20 electric furnaces. For those, we need a cool 200 steel plates, 200 iron plates, 500 copper plates, and 200 stone bricks. That doesn't sound too bad, but those are pretty much all to make the red circuits, and red circuits just kinda suck, since they craft slow, but it is what it is. I set up the furnaces, build the line, and it isn't working. It seems to be a filter issue, so I mess with the pass-through combinators only to realize how big of an oopsie I had made. See, a while back I mentioned a potentially fatal flaw in this design. Do you remember what it was? Well, it was that it would break if the output inserter for any segment ever had more than 5 active filters. This is because inserters can only have 5 filters at a time, and if it has more, one of them just doesn't get applied. This led to stone bricks being unable to get up the spire, and this isn't an oops, let's change some combinators issue. This either requires a rebuild or a redesign, both of which kinda suck. But after a bit, I decide rebuild is the better choice. So of course, I tear the stack down, all but the furnaces and plastic plants. See, this issue sucks, but there is a pretty easy fix for it if you aren't short-sighted and forget to actually watch for it. If you have too many items going down the line, just take some off. I do not need steel or stone bricks for making red circuits, so they don't need to pass through the red circuit lane. Instead, right after the plastic plant, I can split them off onto their own isolated chain of boxes and inserters to be brought up to the top separately. As long as I leave a gap open to bring them back in, there should be no problem with this. So after rebuilding the whole red circuit stack, I can run the stone bricks and steel up the side and plug them back into the main line, just in time to be sent into the electric furnace area to make my electric furnaces. Problem solved. Then just check that I did it right, and that is ingredient 2 down. The third and final material of Purple Science is the good old productivity module. While they take a lot of copper and iron since they're effectively just circuits on circuits, since it's just circuits, it's pretty much just the same as all other red circuit segments so far, but with more green circuits. So in other words, it's not actually hard. That said, the tower for the productivity modules does end up being the tallest tower so far, finally beating out the green science line. And then of course, just like all the others, I set up the purple science stack, which is actually quite small since it makes 3 per craft, and I built the material components over. It took quite a while and is very much slower than all the others so far just due to the sheer scale and this system not being the best for throughput, especially since I'm only using fast inserters, but it is working, and before long I have my first purple science, just under 36 hours into the playthrough. Then of course, output line, connect the stacks together, definitely don't miss the productivity module one while doing this, so leading me to having to clean up the rails and furnaces produced before I can actually run a proper cycle again, and then just visually check that it's working. It is, and it works, thank goodness. I then route it up to the labs and look for tech that I can get with it, but quickly come to the realization that none of it is worthwhile and I should really just move on to yellow science so I can start working towards getting out of this run. However, before setting up yellow science, I want to set up the rocket part ingredients, as it's going to take a while to get 1,000 of these together, and the sooner I start stockpiling, the better. I start with the blue circuit since I suspect they're going to be the most painful, especially with the sulfuric acid, which I need to decide how I'm going to make. The other ingredients are not that bad, as it's just the same red and green circuits we've been making, but the sulfuric acid needs to be made too. And I decide to do that over here, adjacent to the blue circuit line, and pump it in from over here. The sulfuric acid is kinda annoying, since I only need 2 iron and 10 sulfur to make it, as well as some water, but it makes 50, and the blue circuit only needs 5. So it only needs to reset once every 10 cycles, which fortunately I can do by using an arithmetic combinator to change the red signal to a blue signal, and sending that to a decider combinator that sends out the red signal if the blue signal shows that it's been 10 cycles of the blue circuits. I do change this later just to keep making sulfuric acid and to instead be its own cycle and pipe in it, kinda similar to the other fluids afterwards, but for now, it's like this. After those, I set up the low density structure, since while they are expensive, they really are not complicated, just taking steel, copper, and plastic, and after just a bit of debugging, it works just fine. After that, back to the oil area, as I decided fluid-to-fluid recipes are excluded from precision requirements, I just set up advanced oil and oil cracking as normal. Nothing special here. That said, I have an uneven amount of underground pipe since I tore down the old base, and finally found where the other one was. It was over here, at the oil area the whole time. And of course, I need to get that light oil that I bring over to make the rocket fuel, which considering it is made out of light oil and solid fuel made out of light oil, that's really easy. So I got all of the rocket components stockpiling now. Very nice, and I'm definitely not losing my mind. At all, I promise. However, that also means that there's no more excuses. It's time to work on yellow science, and that sucks. But that being said, I am not making 60 yellow science per cycle, as frankly, 2.8 thousand copper plates and 1.1 thousand iron, as well as a bunch of other materials being shoved in the most complicated recipes in any of these sciences so far, just did not feel good, and I didn't want to do it. So instead, I'm going to make yellow science in one line, but only make 6 science per cycle. 6 per cycle is a lot more approachable. For that, I need 280 copper plates, 110 iron plates, 46 plastic bars, and 15 steel plates, all turning into blue circuits, low density structure, and the nefarious flying robot frames. I start the line as any other with the furnaces, and then the plastic plates. After that, I plot out all the green circuits and use the poison capsules to clear out the local foliage before building them. Nothing new so far. After that though, I start getting squiggly with it. This is because, as you can probably imagine, trying to put all of yellow science in one line would have instances where there is going to be a bit more than 5 items passing through an inserter. But as we learned in purple science, we cannot do that. So after green circuits, I split off all of the steel plates to go around while everything else just goes up to be used in the making of the red circuits. At the end of the red circuits, these two paths the items take can then recombine in the end chest. However, the next product, low density structure, just needs the basic copper, steel, and plastic, so everything else can go around on this path. However, it's around here that I realize I did my math wrong, and for some reason I only calculated needing 10 electric motors when I actually need 20! Anyway, after fixing that in the math area, I then just have to remove everything post-green circuits and make the green circuits a little bit longer, as we now need a few extra for the extra electronic motors. But then, I can just put the red circuits back and then the low-density structures too. After the low-density structure, the red and green circuits enter the next block, but nothing else does, instead being routed around because we're making blue circuits next, of which we only need 4. Along with those and the 6 low-density structure, now all I need to make is the flying robot frames. And all of its prerequisites, of course. First, I need my 20 engines. You've seen these before, so not too bad. Iron and steel plates in, everything else around. Also, I opened the chat window and hit tab while doing this, which for some reason makes all of this text. And I did it like 5 times, I don't know why I did that. But anyway, after those, I can move on to the electric engines, taking green circuits and engines in, and everything else can go around. After those, we need to have the batteries, needing copper and iron plates in, and everything else can go around. But finally, with those, I can make the flying robot frames, as they are the only 4-ingredient recipe so far, needing electric engines, steel, green circuits, and the batteries. But since this design does not care how many inputs you need, thank God for that, that just means I add them to the combinators, and it just works. And with all the ingredients done, I just slap down the 2 yellow science assemblers and I can almost activate it. I just need to route fluids first now. Fortunately, that is not too hard. Batteries and blue circuits take sulfuric acid, so I can connect those. Electric engines take lube, so I'll need to make that. And of course plastic needs petroleum, but I have plenty of that and have been routing that since blue science. I add the item inputs first and then connect petroleum. Then, I run out of coal, and the power almost dies, forcing me to shut down the whole factory while I solve that. While it's shut down, however, I do take the time to make the sulfuric acid just do its own loop instead of being tied to the mini blue circuit build, and also pipe it over and the lubricant over to the yellow science because I need both of those things. Then I expand power, I think forgetting that the issue more so started when I ran out of coal, but whatever, it's probably fine. I turned power back on and it's fine, clearly. This quickly shows me that I must have done stuff wrong somewhere since it's not making everything I produced. Originally I thought I did the math wrong and ended up adding plates manually to get it to finish the loop, but as it turns out I just did a filter wrong in the engine area which was trapping iron plates. There was also some other issues, but after connecting wires properly and fixing filters, it does work. And I did do the math right the first time, and did in fact not need to make that extra iron that is now in the box. Don't worry, I fixed that too. And so, in 167 cycles, I'll have enough yellow science to research the rocket silo. All I need to do is put the yellow science on a belt and run it over to the labs. Well, also I started making some hand-fed builds for the rocket silo and landing pad, but those just kinda took like this electric thingy, and also this concrete thing. So, not really that much. And then, the big wait. Or so I wanted to do, but before fully going AFK, thank goodness, I realized we were out of coal again, because that's the issue that we were having in the first place. And that's bad. So I ran a belt over to this coal patch down here and belted it up to the base. And now I should actually be set. But nope, I am also running out of iron, which to be fair, I am going for the endgame research, and I'm still off of the starter patch, which is kind of impressive, but I mean, I'm doing everything precisely, so it kind of makes sense. So I also have to run down and get this iron patch to get this iron, since the original one is pretty much completely empty, because once again, it's the starter patch, it should be at this point. And after taking the time to watch a piece of iron become yellow science pack, and for sure, beating these biters first try, absolutely, I was fairly confident I could just... With all that, I'm fairly confident I should just be able to wait out the rocket silo research. And so, in comes the classic maneuver of saving the game and leaving it running while you go to sleep because it's the middle of the night and you need sleep because you're going insane. Anyway, waking up about 8 hours later, I see that it worked out. Rocket silo research is finished. In fact, pretty much just on time. If you look at the graph, you can see it took pretty much the whole 8 hours to finish that research. Which, to be fair, with how slow my research was, should not be surprising. However, there is still a couple tiny issues I need to finish up. First, I made 100 electric engine units for the rocket silo, but I need 200. Well, that's not too bad, I just need to hand feed some more materials to this and it will get that done. But the bigger issue is I'm still very behind on blue circuits and I need to make the actual, rocket. So I set up 2 more blue circuit segments to speed it up a bit. But with those 3 setups, a bit of time and a bit more handcrafting, I have it all. A rocket silo and 1,000 of each of the blue circuits, low density structure, and rocket fuel. And with that rocket built, I am not making a satellite. You cannot make me. Instead, I run over to the pond, grab 5 fish out with my bare hands, and shove them into the rocket silo as a viable alternative to a high-tech satellite. And with that, I'm done, beating the game in a brisk 60 hours and 16.5 minutes. Classy. So, that's it. So I guess now for closing thoughts. And warning again, you might get motion sick because I'm going to be using B-roll of, the science builds working with that mod. But anyway, for starters, why did I do that? Well, this is kind of a proof of concept for a design I might use in other places in the future, including the final video of the Space Age series, and also if I do Ultra Cube, I've heard that there's a certain thing that might help, that this might be very good for, but we'll see if we get there. But also, just because, yeah, it was fun. More importantly, yes, I am aware, especially post-editing, that I should have done this better, and perhaps one day I shall. I was thinking about saying something like, when I hit 1,000 subscribers, I'll do it again or something like that, but that feels weird, so, I don't know. That being said, if I do hit 1,000 subscribers and people want to see me do this again in a way that isn't so stupid, and, do it actually, well, I feel like I legally have to do that now. So, I have had a concept on how to be more precise using trains, and also with my newfound knowledge that mining drills can in fact be connected to wires. Yeah, I just figured that out after this, and I feel like my brain was blocking that out, because I feel like there's no way I did not know that. But, as much fun as I'm sure that would be, I'm not playing for another 60 hours right now. That comes later, because I need to get a video out sometime this month, hopefully. My upload schedule is already bad enough, I don't want to be making it worse. So, if you want to see me waste days playing Factorio some more, stick around. Let me know, and I'll see ya whenever I do whatever it is I do next. And if you subscribe, you'll be able to see it, more likely, but, do whatever. I'm leaving, I'm going to bed.